After this, Joseph was told that his father was ill. Hey, it's Pastor Jason, and guess what? You and I have reached the end of the Genesis stories. Isn't that amazing? I know it's taken a long time, and we've got this session to go through, and I'm encouraging you to stick around. 2 more sessions beyond chapter 50, which is today, the last chapters. I want to do one shorter session on the parallels between Joseph, Old Testament, and Jesus. I've hinted at that through this Bible study about how we can see what God is doing in Jesus Christ through some of these examples in Genesis, particularly the story of Joseph. There's some really interesting connection points. And then finally, a couple weeks from now, a couple sessions that you'll see, I will do a concluding kind of wrap up. I don't want to call it comprehensive, but I'm going to try to go back to the beginning of the beginnings of Genesis and do a key insights so that you don't miss the big learnings, those overarching themes, what I believe and many other scholars believe are the teachings that God really intends all of God's people to capture out of these wonderful stories of Genesis. So stay tuned for all of that. But today I began with the very first verse of chapter 48. After this, Joseph was told, "Your father is ill." Remember Jacob, Joseph's father. This is his story. We focus on Joseph, he's the star of the musical, the theater, the play. But it's really about Jacob and the concluding chapters of Jacob's life. Today we're on Genesis 48, 49, 50. I'm going to have to do a lot of reading. You're going to have to do a lot of listening. I encourage you to have your Bible, read along. Also, take notes. If you haven't started to do that yet, hey, you still have time. It's just the last class, or 2 or 3 sessions to go as we do the wrap-up. So I always encourage you to read along and to take notes and to seek God's guidance in this. So this is Jacob blessing Joseph's sons, chapter 48 of Genesis. After this, Joseph was told his father was ill. So we know these are the dying days. So he took with him his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. When Jacob was told, "Your son Joseph has come to see you," he summoned his strength and sat up in bed. Jacob said to Joseph, "God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan, and he blessed me." Remember, one thing we know about Jacob at this stage in his life, he has certainly grown in faith, and he gives God credit, and he is speaking about God. This has been a story where certainly God is involved, but it's Jacob who continues to name God. This is God Almighty, or remember, El Shaddai, Hebrew, the God who empowers you, the empowering God, or all-powerful, if you will. It's not as personal. I like God who empowers you. This is the God in Genesis, right? Our God. Jacob says to Joseph and his sons, "God blessed me," verse 4, "said to me, I'm going to make you fruitful and increase your numbers. I will make of you a company of people, and I will give you this land to your offspring and after you for a perpetual blessing." Holding. This is a way, interestingly, at the end of his life, this is a way that we hear God's promises again. They're spoken anew to a new generation, Jacob's sons, who are old enough to understand now. But also, think about Jacob himself, a man who has been through trial and tribulation, a man who has, I don't know about you, but the older I get, the more I have to complain about, the more disappointments life has dealt me. So sometimes, as I age, I'm tempted to be a little negative, okay? Maybe not you, but maybe it's just me. Thank God for someone like Jacob in the Bible who does not wax negative all the time, singing another verse of that old familiar tune, "Ain't It Awful?" You never heard that song? Oh, just listen to people in your life. Somebody's singing that song right now. "Ain't it awful? Ain't it awful the way and you finish that sentence. Mostly it's like they're repeating the headlines from the news. Don't do that. Nobody needs to sing another round of "Ain't It Awful?" Instead, give God glory point to what God has done and the promises of what God will do. These are our ancestors of faith, and this family of faith is passing along blessing, not negativity. Oh, that's an important lesson. So I'm in verse 5. Jacob is speaking to his grandsons face to face. Therefore, your 2 sons who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you in Egypt are now mine. This is a spiritual adoption moment. Don't need to draw up any papers. It's written in Scripture. From God Almighty to Jacob, one of the founding fathers of our faith, to these grandsons. Faith is something we pass along to one another, handing it along generation to generation. Has always been this way, and we'll keep doing it, right? Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine. So it's a spiritual claim. It's a blessing. We're family. I don't care if you were born in Egypt. It doesn't matter to me if you're a foreigner. Mixed marriage, Egyptian and Hebrew, not an issue. These are not complaints. These are not anything for Jacob to make divisive points about. He embraces. Rather than calling people out, he's calling them in. How good an example is this for us today? Verse 6, as for the offspring born to you after them, they shall be yours. They shall be recorded under the names of their brothers with regard to their inheritance. For when I came from Paddan, Rachel, alas, died. That was his beloved wife. I mean, he loved them all, but Rachel particularly his first love. In the land of Canaan on the way, while there was still some distance to go to Ephrath, and I buried her there on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. When Israel, that's Jacob, saw Joseph's sons, who are these? I mean, he knows, but he's, again, trying to bring them closer. Joseph said to his father, they are my sons whom God has given me here. And he said, bring them to me, please, that I may bless them. So he was speaking first with Joseph, and now he's calling the boys in, calling them closer. And this is a poignant moment. It's a tender memory. Verse 10, now the eyes of Israel were dim with age, and he could not see well. So Joseph brought them near, and he kissed them and embraced them. This is the grandfather, loving, welcoming, spiritually adopting, and giving blessing to his grandsons. For Jacob, this is the first time he gets to see them face to face. Hey, remember, this is BC, before COVID. So he could do that. Israel said to Joseph, verse 11, I did not expect to see your face, and here God has let me see your children also. Quick note, the Hebrew word face shows up time and again, just like our English word face. Jacob had to face his past. He had to face a brother who had at one point wanted to kill him, Esau, and they met face to face. Remember that? And that was a poignant moment because they could have embraced in a wrestling match. Instead, they embraced in reconciliation. Jacob met God face to face in that wrestling match with the angel, Genesis 32. We talked all about that. So again, the seeing face to face is so important in this moment. Jacob is saying, I thought you were dead and gone, Joseph. I had no idea I'd ever see your face, let alone live and be healthy enough all these years in Egypt to be able to see your children, your Egyptian-born children, my grandsons, face to face. It's a tender moment. Verse 12, Joseph removed them from his father's knees, and he bowed himself to the face of the earth, with his face to the earth. It's again, with face, a moment of worship as he bows down before his dad. Joseph took them, both Ephraim in his right hand toward Israel's left, and Manasseh in his left hand towards Israel's right. What's the big deal, left and right? And brought them near to him. Well, conventional wisdom, even way before Jesus' disciples were arguing and asked who would be at your right hand was like the place of honor over here. Most people are right-handed, and so right was more strength and that sort of thing. Israel, listen, stretched out his right hand and laid it on the head of Ephraim, the younger, and his left hand on Manasseh. He's like kind of crossing, not the way that Joseph would want his sons to be blessed. And he blessed Joseph and said, the God before whom my ancestors Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all harm. Bless the boys, and in them let my name be perpetuated, and the name of my ancestors, Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude on the earth. Verse 17, there's the blessing. When Joseph saw that his father had laid his right hand on the head of Ephraim, the younger, it displeased Joseph. So he took his father's hand and he moved it. He removed it and put it on his other child's head, Manasseh. What is going on here? Joseph said to his father, "Not so, my father." It's interesting. This is the first time you hear Joseph say anything like any sort of crossword or disagreement with anybody, let alone his father. This is my firstborn. You put your right hand on his head. Verse 19. But his father refused and said, "I know, my son, I know. He also shall become a people. He also shall be great. Nevertheless, your younger brother, his younger brother, shall be greater than he, and his offspring shall become a multitude of nations." So he blessed him that day, saying, By you, Israel, will invoke blessings. By you, talking about the kids, Israel the nation, not Jacob, sorry. By you, Israel the nation, I'm putting that word nation in there, will invoke blessings, saying, God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh. So it's interesting what's happening here. Let me take a break, help you understand. Or simply remember, because you've been through Genesis. If you've been paying attention, reading along in Genesis, you will pick up on, not once, not just twice, but count them, 5 times. 5 times God shows preference to the younger. Now, why is that important? What God is saying in the book of Genesis is that conventional wisdom already exists. Cultures of people already exist by the time the Hebrews are called of God and start to write down these spiritual stories. And what God is saying is, I'm not always going to play by cultural rules. Conventional wisdom is not always going to be God's wisdom. God's wisdom is greater than that. So I will find ways to bless the younger rather than the double blessing upon the oldest firstborn child, male child. I'll find ways for the younger ones to be lifted up, because God is one who will choose for God's self, who will bring justice in God's way of leveling up or evening up. God shows favor unconventionally, often choosing the younger over the elder son. Now, isn't that the case for Jacob himself? So Jacob himself is passing along a blessing that he, in some ways, we think was duplicitous in taking from Esau, but it turned out to be God's will, or God worked it out for good. But it wasn't just the case with Jacob, who does this now with his grandsons. Remember, before him, who else? Isaac wasn't the firstborn. Isaac is the child of the blessing, but Ishmael was the firstborn to Abraham. He has a blessing in his own way, but our story and our blessing from our God follows this path, Isaac to Jacob. Go back before then. God chose Abel over Cain, and Cain killed Abel. So it goes all the way back to the beginning. Just notice the way that God works, and it's about God's blessing and God's will to bring about blessing upon those that he blesses for God's purpose. We don't always have to understand it, and we certainly don't have to agree, because, well, God is God, not me. So I don't make the rules, friends. I'm just reminding you of them. Verse 21. Finishing off in that paragraph, the last of verse 20. So he, Jacob, put Ephraim ahead of Manasseh. Then Israel said to Joseph, I'm about to die, but God will be with you and will bring you again to the land of your ancestors. I will now give you one portion more than your brothers, the portion that I took from the hand of the Amorites with my sword and my bow. So he's leaving land and a double portion of it. What's the big deal here? Remember what I just said about God choosing the younger. So was the case with Joseph. And it's funny how Joseph is kind of like, no, it shouldn't be done that way, when he's a benefiter. Jacob, it happened to that, and it benefited Jacob, and it's now happening to Joseph, and now his grandsons, or Joseph's sons. A portion more, that means a double portion goes to Joseph. That means now the younger, Joseph, not the youngest, but one of the younger, is now receiving the blessing, the double blessing, that would have gone conventionally to the eldest, which is Reuben. Let me read the last will and testament. If you're following along, it's Genesis chapter 49. It's like a reading of Jacob's last will and testament. A little bit ahead of time because he's not dead yet, but we're getting there. So each tribe, each son of Jacob, including the two grandsons that were just introduced, the grandsons are the sons of Joseph, are going to be the 12 tribes of Israel that we know so much about from Old Testament. And so this is how they get their place. Each of them has a place in the promised land. The reading of the will does not go as well for all sons equally, so listen up. Verse 1, chapter 49. Jacob called his sons and said, "Gather around that I may tell you what will happen to you in the days to come. Assemble and hear, O sons of Jacob. Listen to Israel your father. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, and the firstfruits of my vigor, excelling in rank and excelling in power. Unstable as water, you shall no longer excel, because you went up onto the bed of your father, and you defiled it. You went up onto my couch." I got to stop there with Reuben, because right at the very beginning, when he says, "You're my firstborn," it's almost as if Jacob already knows firstborns are not going to be chosen first. So there's a problem here. No longer is God favoring human tradition, and I will not reward you for your sin against me. So you can almost hear, even from that first word, that Reuben is kind of being counted out here. It was his lust. It was his pride. We talked about this when Reuben sinned. Yes, it was a sexual immorality act, but it was pride, that arrogance that says, I'm taking over my father's position while he's still alive. That's a kind of a prodigal son attitude, where I'm going to take my father's inheritance while he's still alive. It's a way of saying to your dad, "You're as good as dead to me. Get out of my way. I'm going to live my own life." So it was very bad, and Reuben is going to pay the price by being cut out of the will here. Now, verse 5, Simeon and Levi, also, they are not in high favor. Are brothers. He's mentioning them together. Why? Because they chose weapons of violence as their swords. That was chapter 34, when they perpetrated violence, even for a good cause. But verse 6, "May I never come into their counsel, and may I not be joined to their company. For in their anger they killed men. At their whim they hamstrung oxen. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel." All right. In other words, I just wrote you two out of my will. And it's because of violence. Remember, in Genesis, from the very beginning, Cain and Abel, God does not like violence. If sins are ranked worse than the other, and that's not an argument we need to get into right now, but in Genesis it appears that the very worst sin is violence, particularly murder. Revenge, trying to get your own justice. Let God do the work of justice. This is a statement, again, against violence, even for a good cause. Remember, they were defending their sister's honor. So you can go back to chapter 34 if you want to. Verse 8 in chapter 49, "Judah, your brothers shall praise you, your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies, your father's son shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He crouches down, stretches out like a lioness who dares to rouse up." Hey, this is important. Judah becomes the remaining tribe in the time of Jesus. It's also the tribe from which King David comes, and where we get the short name Jews, as the last remaining tribe. So understand the lion image becomes an image for the greatness, the courage, the strength of God's people Israel, kind of consolidated into that one tribe from Judah. So important, but it goes on and kind of gets worse. Verse 10, "The scepter shall not depart from Judah." Later on, after King David's sin with Bathsheba and all the problems there, God makes a promise to bless the nation of Israel, the tribe of Judah all along, but the sword shall not depart from your house, God says to David. And here that was an echo of this. Jacob's final blessing, or the reading of his will, is this sense that all along there's going to be strife. Have you seen it to be true? Certainly the Old Testament bears it out. And I don't know if you've ever looked at any of the violence that happens in a place called the Middle East, Israel, the nation, places like Lebanon or the Gaza Strip down there, Palestinians, Jews, all of these folks continue in strife. The scepter has not departed even in 2021. Wow. All right. Verse 11, binding his foal to the vine, his donkey's colt to the choice vine. He washes his garments in wine, his robe in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, his teeth whiter than milk. My goodness, it's a lot of imagery here. Warlike imagery. Again, as I mentioned, it's been conflict since Cain and Abel. 13, Zebulun shall settle on the shore of the sea and shall be a haven for ships. His border shall be at Sidon. Issachar is a strong donkey, lying down between the sheepfolds. He saw that a resting place was good, the land was pleasant. So he bowed his shoulder to the burden and became a slave at forced labor. Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a snake by the roadside, a viper along the path that bites the horse's heel, so that the rider falls backwards. Tough images for some of these boys, right? But here the language turns more beautiful. So listen, instead of like a reading of a will, listen for some of the names of God. Listen for some of those, as I've mentioned to you. You can lift out a devotional verse that can speak to you in your quiet times, in your walk with the Lord. Verse 18 might be one of those. I wait for your salvation, O Lord. In Hebrew, the word salvation is Yeshua. It's the name for Jesus. It's the name for Joshua as well. We're going to talk about this when I do my concluding sessions. 19, Gad shall be raided by raiders. He shall raid at their heels. I mean, still with the violent images. This is going to be part of the people of God in our history, right? Asher's food shall be rich, and he shall provide royal delicacies. Naphtali is a doe let loose that bears lovely fawns. Joseph is a fruitful bough by a spring. His branches run over the wall. Listen to how many blessings abound now that he's talking about Joseph. The archers fiercely attacked him. They shot at him, pressed him hard. Yet his bow remained taut, and his arms were made agile by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob, by the name of the shepherd, the rock of Israel. Again, listen to the majesty, the beauty of the language, the names of God that are mentioned here. By the God of your father who will help you, by the Almighty, again, El Shaddai, the empowering one who is with you, who will bless you with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that lies beneath, blessings of the breasts and of the womb. Blessings of your Father are stronger than the blessings of the eternal mountains, the bounties of everlasting hills. May they be on the head of Joseph. I mean, blessings abound. He's going on. He's picking up almost a sonorous voice and a melodious sound that I'm sure all those who gathered around could hear the abundant blessings of God upon Joseph, on the brow of him who was set apart from his brothers. Oh, if they hadn't been paying attention, I think they all were listening now. I wonder if anybody had shades of jealousy and old resentments well up within them. Doesn't happen with human beings, does it? Even when it's starting to be the good times right now. I'm sure there was still a little bit going on with his family. Families have issues. All human families have some level of dysfunction. But we're learning that blessings can still abound and reconciliation, yes, is still possible. Getting to that again, an echo of that with forgiveness at the very end of the book of Genesis. Here we go. All right, the last one is Benjamin, verse 27. Benjamin is a ravenous wolf, in the morning devouring the prey, at evening dividing the spoil. So, I mean, a positive image, yes, it's very natural. It's a little bit dark, or, yeah, there's some blood there too. But these are the 12 tribes of Israel, and this is what their father said to them when he blessed them, blessing each one of them with a suitable blessing. Another way to think of that is, I've had this experience. I have 2 daughters. My wife and I love each child according to each child's personality. We love them equally, we can say that, but it's also a way of saying we love them in a suitable way, a way that is respective of their personalities and of their each different needs in life. And so Jacob blessed his sons as each not simply deserved, but as each was suited to be blessed in that way. So Joseph becomes like the firstborn. Reuben didn't live into that title. And it's interesting that Joseph's sons who were born in Egypt, his Egyptian sons replace Simeon and Levi because of their violence, as I mentioned from chapter 34. Now we come to a somber moment. We really need 3 coffins to be prepared. Now at first it's Jacob. Jacob's death and burial, verse 29. He charged them, saying, I am about to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my ancestors in the cave, in the field of Ephron the Hittite, in the cave, in the field of I'm going to mess these up. Near Mamre. We remember that, and I can say that one. Near Mamre, in the land of Canaan, in the field that Abraham bought as a burial site. There, Abraham and his wife Sarah were buried there. Isaac and his wife Rebekah were buried, and there I buried Leah. The field and the cave that is in it were purchased from the Hittites. So all of this was, reminding Joseph of the history that had just been recounted as we went through in previous chapters of Genesis. 33, when Jacob ended his charge to his sons, he drew up his feet into the bed, breathed his last, and was gathered to his people. Rest in peace, our wonderful ancestor in the faith, Jacob, or Israel. Now we're in chapter 50. Before we start this, I want to say a couple things about Jacob, because here concludes a really important life. Jacob's life and death give us encouragement, inspiration as people of faith. What a dynamic character Jacob was. Not perfect, no, but he showed significant growth. He had spiritual growth. He developed a more mature faith through the adversity that a lot of it called upon his own head, the struggles that he had in his own family and almost being killed by his brother. He was responsible for that, but he also learned how to work hard and how to become more of a moral character. So he dies in peace with his whole family, all the boys, grandkids around him. It was a long journey that's now come to an end, and he made his last words count. He really did speak well, positively, and he spoke to each a word of blessing, even though some of them may not have thought they were hearing the words they wanted to hear, right? But he did the right thing before God. From beginning to end, Jacob was a sojourner. From start to finish, he was a pilgrim. That is, as an example for all people of faith, we are always on a journey. We should always be growing. We should always be moving Godward. And this is the case for Jacob, who died at a very old age, which means blessing. God was with him all the way. As Tennyson once wrote, old men must die, or the world would grow moldy, only to breed the past again. When I first read that Tennyson quote, I thought it sounded a little funny, for the world to grow moldy. But the idea is that we grow stronger. People of faith, I would hope, of moral conscience, will learn from our dear father and grandfather, from the ancestors of faith, from these stories in Genesis, as well as from one another in our own families. We learn so that we don't simply repeat the past again. But do we? Well, I'll let you to think about that. I'm going to go back to chapter 50 now, but I wanted to give Jacob's life a moment at this time of his dying. Joseph is certainly going to have his moment with his dad, and it's a poignant moment, but I'm just going to read it. Chapter 50 of Genesis. We're in the last chapter, verse 1. Jacob has just died. Then Joseph threw himself on his father's face and wept over him and kissed him. We often see Joseph weeping. He's a man with a big heart, and he's not afraid to let that show appropriately. Verse 2. Joseph commanded the physicians, they're in Egypt, remember, embalm his father. So the physicians embalmed Israel. They spent 40 days doing this as the time required for embalming. And the Egyptians wept for him 70 days. It's a long period of mourning. It just simply shows fulfillment. Wow. They paid a lot of respect to Jacob because of Joseph's position. When, verse 4, the days of weeping for him were past, Joseph addressed the house of Pharaoh. If I have now found favor with you, please speak to Pharaoh as follows. My father made me swear an oath. He said, I am about to die in the tomb that I hewed out for myself in the land of Canaan. There you shall bury me. Now therefore let me go up so that I may bury my father, and then I will return. Pharaoh answered, Go up, bury your father as he made you swear to do. So Joseph went up to bury his father. With him went up the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his household, all the elders of the land of Egypt, as well as all the household of Joseph, his brothers, and his father's household. Only their children, their flocks, and their herds were left in the land of Goshen. With chariots, charioteers, it was a great company. Verse 10, when they came to the threshing floor of Atad, which is beyond the Jordan, when they held there a very great and sorrowful lamentation, and he observed a time of mourning for his father 7 days. When the Canaanite inhabitants of the land saw the mourning and the threshing of the floor, they said, This is a grievous mourning on the part of the Egyptians. Therefore the place was named Abel Mizraim. I was going to be miserable in trying to pronounce that. I practiced it. It didn't help. You can read it there. It's beyond the Jordan. But it was a noticeable thing. So many people giving such a funeral celebration of life. So it was meaningful, and they even renamed the place because of it. Thus, verse 12, his sons did for him as he instructed them. So again, it's honor your mother and father. It's doing the right thing. It's a development of moral character and a fitting funeral for one of our ancestors in faith. Verse 13, they carried him to the land of Canaan, buried their father in the cave, the field of Machpelah, near Mamre, which Abram bought as a burial site from the Hittite. After he had buried his father, Joseph returned to Egypt with his brothers and all who had gone up with him to bury his father. I said prepare 3 coffins. Here comes number 2. Realizing that their father was dead, Joseph's brothers said, What if Joseph still bears a grudge against us and pays us back in full for the wrong that we did to him? I don't know about you, but sometimes in life, past regrets have a way of resurfacing. What's that old country song? We bury the hatchet, but leave the handle sticking out. I would just say to you real quick, and I'm going to go back to reading this. The brothers may have felt that Joseph's love for their dad, Jacob, had helped Joseph, motivated him to act more graciously towards his brothers. And now that Jacob was gone, Joseph didn't have any motivation to be, good to his brothers. And maybe he might bring up this past grievance. So I guess it's just one way to say it is, isn't it natural to worry? Isn't it natural to wonder, hey, and our guilt plays on our conscience. Even after maybe we've received forgiveness, sometimes these things come back up. So they need to bury the past. That's why I said, get another coffin ready. Verse 16, they approached Joseph saying, Your father gave this instruction before he died. Say to Joseph, I beg you, forgive the crime of your brothers and the wrong they did in harming you. Now therefore, please forgive the crime of your servants of the God your father. Joseph wept. Again, we see his heart. He's not faking anything here. He wept when he spoke to them, verse 18. Then his brothers also wept. fell down before him and said, "We are here as your slaves." But Joseph said to them, "Do not be afraid. Am I in the place of God? Even though you intended to do harm to me, God intended it for good, in order to preserve a numerous people, as he is doing today. So have no fear. I myself will provide for you and your little ones." In this way he reassured them, speaking kindly to them. Now that Jacob is gone, again we have a reenactment, another example of the reconciliation that had already happened between them. They needed reassurance, and so we hear these words again. What you intended for evil, God intended for good. God can do so much more than we can. And sometimes we don't know his plan or his purpose, especially when we see adversity. But God will work your adversity to God's advantage. Reconciliation is possible even when it seems to be in doubt, like maybe it's going to fall apart now that our father figure has died. Maybe sons are not going to act as well toward one another, but it is possible. And here it happens again in this poignant and powerful scene where Joseph maintains his right moral choice to forgive. This is powerful. Jesus also forgives from the cross. And we'll talk more about these connection points between Joseph and Jesus later on in a coming session. Now Joseph, the third coffin I was mentioning, here comes the last days and the death of Joseph himself. Verse 22. So Joseph remained in Egypt, he and his father's household. So Joseph lived 110 years. Joseph saw Ephraim's children to the third generation. The children of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were also born on Joseph's knees. So see, he also had a full life and a full family and could welcome and bless all of these grandchildren and great-grandchildren as well. Verse 24, Joseph said to his brothers, "I'm about to die, but God will surely come to you and bring you up out of this land to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob." So Joseph made the Israelites swear, saying, "When God comes to you, you shall carry up my bones from here." And then Joseph died, being 110 years old. He was embalmed and placed in a coffin in Egypt. And thus ends the reading of the book of Genesis. Congrats to you all. You've made it through. I hope you'll rejoin me in another session to talk more about Joseph and particularly to link his life to the greatest, Jesus himself. One thing I'll say in closing, when his brothers bowed down before him, remember this was part of Joseph's dreams. This is what kind of fed at least a seeming pride, a bit of arrogance in that young man Joseph with the special coat on. "Hey, brothers, you're going to bow down to me." He doesn't lord it over them. Remember, Jesus taught us like this. Don't take any position of power or any sense of personal greatness and lord it over. That's what the Gentiles do, or the pagans at that time. Jesus said instead, humble yourself. And Jesus often said, "Arise, do not fear." He said that to his disciples, Jesus did. I can imagine Joseph saying this to his brothers in this last scene where they again bow down before him, begging, "Will you forgive us for our past resentment, anger toward you, selling you as a slave?" As they're on the ground, I can imagine Joseph, as he's weeping, he gets down there with them, and he's in a word saying, like Jesus said, "Arise. Now stand up with me and embrace me. Let's look at each other face to face. Arise and do not fear. I forgive you. We are reconciled." I pray that you may be able to have the moral courage, the depth of faith to say that to anyone in your life who needs your forgiveness. Look to the Lord. Listen and hear Jesus say to you, "Arise, do not fear. I am with you, and I forgive you." These are some of the greatest lessons of life, and they're right here in the Old Testament of all places, in the book of Genesis. For God is always the same, yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And so if you're dealing with any difficulty, trust in the Lord. And by the way, rather than complaining or being negative, Simply recount His promises. God is with you and will promise you a blessing today and all the days that God is with you. So good to be with you. Join me again for Joseph and Jesus next time.